So the next panel for me is a very, very cool one because these are two colleagues from the futuring world who also think a lot about not only looking forward, but looking back to look forward, and all sorts of different methods and they have different frameworks. And they're going to help us with the task we're about to set out upon, which is the backcasting, standing into the future and looking back at what we need in order to make it happen. So I'd like to invite John and Ann to come on up, come on up, come on up. This is John Willshire, Ann. Here we go, Ann and John. And so, yeah, full disclosure, Ann, we used to work together.
Yes, we did.
At the former company.
Many years, yes.
Many years, yes, we did. So tell us a little bit more about what everyone in the room needs to know about you in the context of what we're about to engage on.
Well, firstly, I've come from Australia, so I was at the pointy end of travel 31 hours to get here, and I've been wanting to come to your 2040 for the entire time. So I'm really, really pleased to be here at this time, and probably won't be here again next year.
It's great you could be here this year.
Yeah,
Glad it could work out.
Being from Australia, Chris always says we go walkabout. So because we have to come so far, I've come to Europe for a month, and so I'm travelling around, and this is really sort of one of the pivotal things that I wanted to do while I was over here. So came to do that. My background is in quite technical work, so I did a PhD in hypersonic aerospace, which is then led me to...
Okay, she's a rocket scientist.
All
right? I mean, how awesome. You can all say you have met a rocket scientist.
And it's not rocket.
Oh, come on.
So that led me to a career actually in sustainability. So a lot of the methods and things like that, the analysis, the computational design and things like that led me to quite a technical role in sustainability. But through that role, I realized that actually we can model things and we can estimate what they were, and we can look at the past and do all these calculations. But what we really need for sustainable futures and regenerative futures is to have people change, and people change the way they live. So I met Chris and joined the Foresight team and worked in the Foresight team using different foresight methods so that we can vision the future and therefore create the future we want. And the other thing I was going to mention is I also, in Brisbane, I have a Futures Collaborative, so co-founder of the Brisbane Futures Collaborative. And just to shout out, because I've already talked to a few people about potentially collaborating, we run quarterly sessions where we just bring futures thinkers or people who are interested in futures thinking together to explore a topic and apply some futures methodologies. So that's something sort of I do for fun, but to bring people together.
Juliet, I think, has convinced half of us we have to come to Uganda.
Yeah.
She's going to help make it happen. You're going to start. You've worked on Brisbane, so we can go from different corners of the world, out of La Punt in Little Switzerland. We can go meet in different parts of the world. It's really awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate your presence and being here. John, we've just met recently, followed you for a while, and know your work, and always a fan as well. So tell us a bit about you and what your context is here for us today.
Thank you, Chris. So my name's John. I run a strategic design practice in the UK called Smithery, which has been going for 14 years, and our governing idea behind it is making things people want beats making people want things. And by the word things, I lean into an explanation of that from the French philosopher Bruno Latour. So he describes, because of where things as a word comes from, which is the same way as same place as ding in German or ting in Scandinavian languages come from. It's a gathering, an assemblage. So Latour describes things as a complex assembly of contradictory issues, which is quite nice. So when I use the word thing, it's not because I'm being imprecise or you're being imprecise when you use it. It's because we're being precisely acknowledging of how complex that thing is. And I'm recently, sort of for the last 2 years, been sort of like stepping carefully into the regenerative space, just after doing some work for UNDP and Wellcome Trust, just understanding how regenerative practices are something that people can step into, define for themselves, learn from other people. So we also run a regenerative practices collective called the STEPS Collective, which stands for Show the Easy Place to Start.
Show
the easy place to start.
Show.
Yeah. I've got a funny accent as well because I'm Scottish.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's nuts.
Yeah, so you're probably also coping.
Yeah, we got Scotland, we got Australia, and I can do my good American accent, and we can get all the different Englands up here. There we go. Yeah, so, okay. Help us, you both have different frameworks which you use to help us thinking about the future. So, Anne, what's the framework which you use? And I know, share us a little bit your thinking, how we think long term.
Well, I suppose with a number of the frameworks that we use, I mean, the Foresight methodology, in fact, we often use methodologies that are quite similar to what we've been doing at Your 2040, where we start to think about, what are those signals and what are those trends that are happening, and try and create a number of futures, what futures that we might like to create, different scenarios, futures that might be good, bad, indifferent, and then try to come up with a preferable future and guide ourselves towards that preferable future. So a number of different methodologies. So some of the ones that we use in the Futures Collaborative, we've done a number of sort of picking a topic and then applying a certain framework. And one of the ones we use is called causal layer analysis, which is, I think, mostly out of Australia. There's a professor at Sunshine Coast University that uses this, where what we see when we look around is sort of the top layer, and what we need to do is to really drill down to below that to think of the litany, think of the other layers that are actually forming what we see on the surface, and then we often with that create a metaphor. So we might create a metaphor for what we want to create so that we can sort of think about something in a sort of a visual way.
Okay, that's great, thanks. So CLA was one of the things, we'll come back to that in just a moment. What about you, Maestro? You have some frameworks as well. You got like a dozen frameworks.
What are
you going to share with us today?
Part of the curse of my background is that I studied economics and econometrics, and then met some economists and ran away from that. And so really my work's a mix of kind of like design and strategy and futures and whatever else and so on. But the one thing that I've kept from economics is the ability to draw abstract frameworks and go, it's just an explaining thing. I might show the cones one.
Go for it.
So we took, hands up if you've seen a futures cone before, or the futures cone. Oh, okay. Good. So quick explainer for those not. So usually you see half of this diagram, and it starts here, and it points out into the future and says we have probable futures, plausible, possible, and preposterous. And the preposterous are ones that you can't even see from here. And you go, well, that'll never happen. And then two years later, you go, oh, that happened. Brexit.
Not just that.
Not just that. So the sort of, but one of the ways that, so I think the model has flaws and failures. So I and other futurists, and Anne shared the work of Cheryl Doig, but there's other people are saying like, you can't talk about the future unless you talk about the past. So in this model, we sort of so rather than the probable, the plausible, the possible, and the preposterous, we look backwards and talk about the tangible, the intangible, the remembered, and the forgotten. So the sort of so if I think of London buses, so the tangible is I can go to London now and point at red London buses. They're there. The intangible is Transport for London. We all know it exists and the label's on it, but we don't really know what it is. But we can probably do some work to find out what it is and how it's constituted and how it's paid for. The remembered is maybe the old London route master, that you go, oh, so that was a bus that used to exist, but only people of a certain age or certain interest will remember that. And the forgotten are all of the older forms of transport that exist in London, which no one really has memory of. So if there's the first rule of assemblage space, you've got to pay as much attention to the past as you do the future. Rule 2, as you can see, there's a little circle round here. So we call this the contemporary corona. The things that we've immediately lived through, feel disproportionately important. So suddenly we think the things that have just been happening in the last year or so are the most important things that will dominate the future to come. AI is the current one. 5 years ago, driverless cars was that. It was suddenly, this is going to rip apart every city and transform every way, and it's going to be here by 2025. And here we are in 2025, little tests and stuff going on. So rule 2 is like, beware the effects of the present. And then rule 3 is sort of like this locus where you sit. That's your perspective. And what is preposterous for you, someone who's sitting here will go, well, that is probable for us. So you or your team or your organization needs to stretch that perspective to really understand the diversity of thought that comes into what might happen in the future. So we call this model assemblage space because it's kind of like neither cone is real. None of these cones are real. It's like the spoon in the matrix. They don't exist. But what they do, they allow you to gather pieces of research to assemble into the types of futures that Anne's talking about.
Yeah, and I'd just add to the futures cone, because, I mean, you see this, but the further away you go from the present, so even though we think we understand the past, when you're looking back, the further you go, the less you know about it, because you're hearing stories, you're being passed on this information, and so you need to really think about what that past is. And one of the things, for those who came on the Genius Loci with me yesterday, one of the things in Australia that we've been doing recently is really trying to ask traditional owners and really understand from the cultures there what their past was. And we often say that stories and science, there is no difference. They're treated equally because that's how traditional owners would pass down their information, and they really had this really great scientific information that's there, but the way it was passed on was through traditional stories. So that's probably,
that's
yeah.
No, I think
I'll
it's
let
a
you
really
ask
important
another
addition.
question.
No, it's a really important addition.
Yeah.
I think there's this idea that there's the fact in fiction, right? These are mutually respectful. I want to focus on backcasting.
Sure.
So tell me, Anne, about backcasting. What do we need to understand in this room about backcasting from your standpoint? And John's going to the same question to you to add on to what Anne might or might not say.
Yeah. Can we stick with our futures cone? Because I think, like when we look at it, this is the future. This is what we're looking at, and these are all, like, any point on here could be the scenario or the vision that we're working towards, and maybe the vision's out here. But we're back here. So what we need to do is say, well, in 20 years, 50 years, or what are we doing?
It's close to
25.
25.
In 20 years, what do we need to achieve now? So you can't just say, oh, well, I want to have regenerative farming, everything here, because it just doesn't fit into the framework of what we do. So we need to start stepping back to see what we need to be doing now so that we'll move towards this future. So for example, we've been talking about the forest, and we want to have this great interactive forest, but we also understand that climate change is going to have changed the context that it's surviving in, and so we know we need to help that forest adapt and remain alive and thriving, but that will also require some change. So we need to step back and say, well, what do we need to do now to achieve that? So maybe the step just before that will be maintaining that forest and seeding it in different ways. But in order to be doing that seeding and having that change, maybe we need to be starting to talk to the community before that. Maybe we need to set some policies now that will allow that to happen, and then what we think, all of these steps. And I think the main thing I always find with backcasting is that often you have all of these steps, and there's normally quite a few that you have around here, and then a few that you have around here, but you sort of like lose touch with the full scale of the time, and you also get a little bit surprised by how this is not actually a long time. When you're actually in design, it takes quite a lot of time to change and achieve each of these steps. Like if we say, oh, we want to set a policy, maybe that's going to take us a year to write the policy, and then or maybe it's a year to convince people that we need a policy, and then write the policy, and then interact it, and then you probably have a change in government or something like that. So it's all of those steps that can really sort of disrupt us achieving our future.
In Switzerland, we have this wonderful process called Vernehmlassung.
Yeah.
And the Vernehmlassung process is you have to send it out for consultation. So you said 1 year, it would take at least 3 years here, because everyone has an opinion, which is it's a part of our distributed democracy process. It's wonderful and horrendous at the same time. So that's it's a really, really good point. I just want to say that because we're thinking about the backcasting. The good example is what are some of the things which have to be put in place so that the next step can successfully occur. Right? That's the key thing. John.
So and with that as well, in fact, so like going back to yesterday's hospitality panel, we just picked up on some language which you start to spot around organizations all the time. We're just going like, oh, it's a process. We have to do this and then that, and we have to involve people, and we've got to go step by step. So almost the sort of a lot of organizational process is about we're here and we have to do this and then this and then this. So there's no kind of out there, and it's just, but we have to do this. So you have no yet imagined future that you're stepping into. But I also think that can be a cultural problem. So there are cultures in the world who don't view the future as in front of us, but behind us. So we're stepping back into the future because we can't see it. So it's more like you're walking backwards. So rather than going step by step into the familiar of what we know, it's more about we're walking backwards into something we're a bit uncertain about. So to the backcasting point, I think it's sort of like having the futures and coming step by step back is great. You can then do the thing that you go, I think this will lead to something different. I think this will sort of like take us on that first step. For me, what you can't then do is just decide that that's inevitable, because you're designing for emergence at that point. Be really alive to the sorts of things that will happen that you weren't looking for, that you hadn't designed for, that you weren't perhaps expecting, because every time you put something new into play, unexpected things happen, and they're often my favorite things.
That's a really good point. Now, I want to ask both of you, when we're looking at the future, sometimes we can be paralyzed by the complexity. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know this. What advice can you give us about avoiding this sort of future paralysis?
In fact, on our...
that was a nice pass, Anne. Well,
yeah.
We all saw that. That was good.
I always go first.
We've got a rugby thing going on. It's called a hospital pass.
That's good.
I like complexes as well.
So we talked about this on the Genius Loci group that I just did as well. So there's a thing called abductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is you set up the hypothesis and you try and test it and prove or disprove it. You have inductive reasoning where you're kind of like working on, you have all the evidence and then you say, look, what does all this evidence tell me? Abductive reasoning is this kind of like weird thing in the middle, and you go, I don't have all the evidence yet, but my gut feeling is we should go and look there. So it's described sometimes as, abductive reasoning is a tool for economizing inquiry. So leaning into those kind of like your experience, your gut feelings, your intuition to go, I'm not sure yet, but I can do something, start something, prototype something, which just gets me more information about this. I'm not frozen because I'm doing a thing. In fact, I wrote something on a card earlier, either yesterday or this morning, just inspired by some of the things I've been hearing on this stage. It's sort of like, we are where we are and we do what we can. We are where we are and we do what we can. So don't worry about it, just do a thing. A thing is a complex assembly of contradictory issues, but just do a thing and see what emerges.
Yeah, that's really great. I think that's really important when we're thinking about the backcasting. Don't get lost in the complexity. Don't let that be an excuse for not making a decision.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think sometimes the complexity can be sort of the easy bit, because you can do lots of analysis, you can go and read a lot of stuff, and you can ask, scientists or, particularly now there's so much information that's available that you can kind of collect all of this information and you can have this really, really, really great understanding of now, but you don't really know about the future, so you might make too many predictions, and you might sort of get caught up in, oh, that's not going to work because this happened before, and things like that. So sometimes, yeah, it's just a matter of sort of setting one thing that you're going to do. We're going to achieve this. It's possible, and then going to the next step.
So that kind of reminds me of. Shout out to the Royal College of Art Design Futures Masters team. So Tricia and Asmita and Ria were here from there. So I teach on that course. But a lot of the stuff we're doing is futures through design. So rather than being sometimes stuck in those big scenario worlds, it's like, how can we use the tools of design to actually explore and do different things? So we have one model called 3 future frames, where you have scenario, situation, stuff. And it's a kind of a loop that you guys are like, you're from scenario, you go, okay, so you've told me about the scenario quickly. Bring it down to a situation. Tell me about the hospital where this plays out. Tell me about the school where this lives. Tell me about the forest or the village where this happens. You can draw a picture. Then you can do a kid spot the difference. And you go, okay, so if I take LePunt train station, and then I've got a picture of LePunt train station, I can draw 5 things on top of it. 5 things that will be different about this place in 2040. And then I can come down to stuff and say, well, what's going to be different about the ticket machine? And then I draw the ticket machine. Now, that's not the end of the process getting to those artifacts, because you go, once you draw a ticket machine, you come back to the situations and go, well, tell me about the ticket machines and the transport stations down the line. And then tell me about the other stuff you need to research in your scenario. And so you have this ongoing loop, this balance between scenario, situation, and stuff. And people go, but when do you finish if you keep going back and forward and back and forward? And it's go, you finish with design futures work when the thing you want changed is changed. That's the end. It's not sort of like, oh, I've delivered an artifact, I've written a scenario, I've got a PDF report. You are done when the thing is changed.
I think go ahead.
And I think with that, you might need to do a consultation through that. So be it, with the community, be it, talking to different people about what they want to change or what they see the issues with. And I suppose the other thing, like we often, so we do consult with traditional owners and things like that as to, this is what it was used, what things were used for in the past, and what's been used over decades, and therefore sort of understanding what success has been in the past, and therefore what might be right for now, and how to change those things.
I really like this scenario, situation, stuff sort of trilogy. It's part of world building. We're trying to understand what this world is that we're moving into. And I think we mentioned this before. For those who were here last year, we did the exercise around world building and trying to think of what is that world we're coming into, trying to imagine the street corner, the train station, the shoes we might be wearing or not wearing. And this is, I think, for us, as we're doing this next backcasting, each of us will be looking at the future through the eyes of one of the characters. So with the backcasting with the characters, what is some advice you might share with us today if we're the mountain or the forest or the Corona Hotel?
We're both the forest. Weirdly, we're in different groups, but we've both got forest.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of odd, but maybe not. We'll find out. Yeah. But what advice would you give us all when you're trying to think about that? Because tomorrow morning at this time, we were going to go, wow, that was amazing. We've got these 10 incredible backcasts.
Well, I think the students wrapped it up really nicely with these lovely glasses, your empathy glasses where you put them on. I don't know, I might mess up my microphone and regret it forever. So I'm going to put my empathy glasses on.
Dude, that is awesome.
How much more future does that feel?
Which is lovely. And, I think that's the thing. It's just we have our own thoughts and about what we want to achieve and what we think the right future is, but it's really stepping out of that and trying to really think of things. And, you can think of things through a lot of different perspectives so that you can sort of break your mold of how you might think and sort of really challenge it. And I found that working with the group is also a really interesting way of doing it, because, you have particularly here, we have people from all around the world, like all different generations and backgrounds, and that's where you get all of these different perspectives that you can start to wrap up and say, okay, what might this for us forests want to become, and you know, like even the conversation so far, you know, it's quite eye-opening as to what different people like within that group feel.
Thank you. We have one more board.
Yeah, do you wanna?
Yeah.
And then it's gonna be your turn to think about some questions to ask these folks, because then again, you're gonna have to start digging in very shortly in about 35, 40 minutes, digging into making your backcasting, assuming that the heavens don't open and we don't get rained on.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's
Scottish.
I brought my rain jacket.
Okay, you guys will be good. Okay.
Very quick explanation of the diagram. So this is something called regenerative triangulation, which we worked on to think about. Regeneration and sustainability are not always in the same direction. So it's basically two models mixed up. You've got Bill Sharp's Three Horizons, which Olivia was talking about in the Genus Loci. And then you have Bill Reed's Regenesis work that talks about business as usual, relative improvement, restorative action, and what the regenerative paradigms up here. So sustainability and regenerative are in different directions. When it comes to backcasting, what we like to do is map out current activities that are moving to some sort of sustainable future and go, if we continue as we are, we're going here. Then you use future and techniques to think about, okay, so what does a regenerative future really look like? So economically, socially, and environmentally. All three of those things have to improve dramatically for these things. Once you get to what this looks like, so for the forest, in our group we were talking about 2040 comes along and there's a whole sustainable healthcare service within the forest. So it's called, what do we call it? Mountain maintenance. You come here to work on the valley and work on yourself. And it's essentially, it's a place where lots of great things happen. It's an industry, there's lots of jobs created and so on. But you step backwards and go, well, if it's an industry and I'm doing backcasting, to get to an industry, you have to have a company. So it has to be our company doing this and so on. And if there's a company, there has to be a prototype. And if there's a prototype, there has to be a start. So you suddenly start get back to this place where you go, we're going to do a one-off experiment in the next 12 months. Where you say, what would it look like to bring a group of people here who want to work on themselves in mental health perspective, but also physical health, who also want to sort of like help maintain the forest in the valley, and see what emerges. And you go, backcasting should bring you to a place where you could go, oh yeah, but we could do that. We could, look, as evidenced, we could bring a room full of people here who are interested in this sort of thing. We could think about who might want to sponsor that from a farmer perspective or whoever and so on. So backcasting should bring you to a place where you go, oh, well, if that might be the start of that, we could do this. And then, of course, other things will emerge on the way. Right. But it will feel different to where you think the things were going.
Fantastic. So I think that's a really important point for tomorrow when we're thinking this afternoon. The first step is something, Gesundheit, is something that we can all say, that can happen. That sets you on a direction, sets us on a direction towards this vision. And we can have 10, 12 different things we can say, we can do that. I think that's the key part. I'd like to leave with that for now, just for a moment, so in between y'all. Now take about 5 minutes, and I'll put the timer to discuss between yourselves questions you'd like to ask us on the stage about the backcasting, about Foresight, or more about what they've been sharing with you. All right? All right. Who would like to ask a question? Who would like to ask the first question? First question right over here.
I have a question on the cone. So I'm just thinking like the cone with the big open future. I mean, that's something you use when you do scenarios, right? When everything is possible. For once, you already have a shared vision. And there's a lot of pathways that go to this shared endpoint. I'm wondering, why not make it more like a ball that becomes round immediately to allow for a lot of different pathways? And then in the end, it becomes pointed because it's kind of going to the vision you already know. Like, why is that shape? Why is it not the other way around?
Why is the cone shaped like the future's cone?
Not the, so,
We'll ask Joseph Voros.
Yeah.
I think part of the kind of the reason it's shaped as it is because it's trying to describe to people there are many possible things coming. But I mean, back to the point, this cone's not real; it doesn't exist. But it's just a framework to kind of to open up people to thinking that there are lots of possible places that we could be on it. To your point of sort of like focusing in on one end and so on, that almost, to me, that starts going into double diamond territory, and I don't believe in the double diamond either. Just because it's sort of like it's too finished and focused and process living, so we're just like living sort of like we will get through time to this perfect destination. That's not how the world works. We are where we are, and we do what we can. We see what emerges, and then we go next. So it's kind of like do things rather than try and plan that perfect journey.
And I think the other thing is, you could have a number of different scenarios that might, they might be all interesting futures that you might want to work towards. So you might create different pathways. And the other thing we do when we're designing a lot, designing strategy, is looking at adaptive planning, where we might think about, if we're heading towards this certain scenario, but this changes, we might have to adapt that path. So we might have different steps that we're going to take, and then different points along the way that we check in and say, this is actually, maybe it's a factor that we can't control, and if we can't control that factor and it changes in a different way than we were originally thinking it was going to change, then we have to adapt what we're doing as part of our strategy. And so you have those points where you check in, change the pathway forward, and then do that. So I think, it's I don't quite think it should go the other way around, but
So I'm going to give you a slightly different answer. I'm going to step out of facilitator Chris to futurist Chris.
Yeah.
So for me, very often what we're trying to think of is like all roads lead to Rome. So it doesn't matter where you start from, you end up in Rome, right? You could be in Hamburg, you could be in London, you could be it doesn't matter, you get there. And for us, this is the vision, the backcast. When you're sitting saying, okay, we're going to get to Rome, we also have to, Gesundheit, we have to look at where we started from. And whether that's a Kugel, whether it's a map, it kind of depends, whatever works best for your mental image of that we're trying to get to that point, Gesundheit. All right. That's how, so we're all trying to get to that. And we have all these different characters, all these different ways of getting there. And there's always going to be a detour, the tunnel's going to be down, or something we have to go over the pass instead of through. So there's always going to be a different way, as Anne was saying, it's not exactly going to map as we want it. But so the backcast is, we're in Rome, now how did we get here? That's the case. All of us are in Rome, we're all in La Punt. How did we get here? We came from all sorts of corners, and this is also the backcast. We went first, we got to the station, and a lot of us came through the station. And after that, some got off in Suwat, then we go back to St. Gallen, we got this, then you go boom. So all of a sudden that backcast takes a whole different bifurcation as we're heading out back into time. That makes sense? Okay, who else has another question? There's a second one there, go ahead.
I think our question relates to this, because how do you combine the backcasting approach with the adaptation or the adaptive approach?
You didn't need to bring your Air Force as well. Hello? Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So how do you combine this backcasting approach with the adaptation approach?
So we might backcast a number of different scenarios, and so then you would think about the journey to each of a number of different futures, and then you would potentially move between them at a point in time once you see how some of the factors have evolved.
It's the good thing about prototypes is kind of like they're small, and they don't have to make sense together. You can create a number of different prototypes within the backcasting from different scenarios, and go, we're going to do a prototype around this, we're going to do a prototype along that, and we're doing a prototype along this. They don't have to inform each other. They could be pointing at different futures, but they will all create different knowledge, new information that you have. You can then start again and go, right, okay, so what do we know about these three different places? So you can adapt from these three. You don't have to have one big view of the world and certainty. To Chris's points on pathways, you go, let's take the first step along three different pathways. We know they're different. We know they don't have to add up. We know we can do them in different places around different topics. We're doing them to discover. We're not doing them to kind of decide for the next 15 years.
And to Chris's point, you know, like if you all going to Rome, and you know, some people start in different locations, and therefore they have a different path there, so their backcast would be slightly different, but you know, you're still heading to it the same way.
And one point to build on that as well: once you get into that prototyping mode, record your results, good or not, so that the next people who come through your job or through your team have. There's almost like there's a sign at the path that says, we tried this way, it ain't this way. So let's think about embedding that knowledge into your organization. It's like, here's a thing we've tried because of these conditions and didn't work. The conditions might change, you could try it again, but if not, then probably not this.
Yeah, and these are the assumptions we made to make this decision, and then you can always go back and say, oh, well, we made this assumption, but that assumption was wrong, so we need to change the way we got there.
Great, thank you. Here we go. Right here, all right?
Right. So the author and biochemist Isaac Asimov wrote, "It's better to make a good future than to predict a bad one." So we know that when we make assumptions for the future, if we talk about that in a positive and in a negative way, we can actually influence the probability that will happen. And like for renewable energy, people from the fossil industry, they talk bad about it, so people invest less. So it's less probable that they really will have an impact. How can we convince, in very simple terms, maybe even simpler than that, our kids and our neighbors that that's how it works? Like if we believe that renewable energies, for example, that they will have an impact, we have to work on that, because then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. How do we do that?
The billion-dollar question.
I'm going to tell my garden story. So we moved into a new housing estate, and as with all new housing estates in the UK, basically nature was scrubbed from the earth, and they constructed all these houses, and then you just turfed everything and gave us the house. So this was about 9 years ago. James and I built a nature watch camera to look for bird life. We put it in the garden, no birds. We put it somewhere else, no birds. And we realized that there was no nature lived there. So we started rewilding our garden. Took about 4 years, but we got birds, insects, ponds, whatever else. Wrote a blog post about it, because that's the kind of thing I do. But then started talking to neighbours about it too, and then bought too many hedge plants, and then started giving them away to neighbours, and then suddenly, so now we've got a neighbourhood group of about 70 people, all rewilding the whole estate, taking on care of the green spaces around it as well, because we've realised just rewilding one garden's not enough. You have to think about the whole estate, and then you think about the estate beyond that, and then we've connected to a programme called Wheel to Waves across Sussex. And then Gardener's World got in touch as well, and so I had to put a viewer's video into BBC Gardener's World, where Monty Don said, and I use this quote at home quite a lot, as James will testify, "John is absolutely right." So, thank you, Monty Don. Completely out of context, but... But to specifically answer the question, it's all like, do a thing. Like, if you can show people the thing, it changes. Yeah. So there's all into the Asimov quote, it's all like, things you can do and show other people and involve them, and they go, oh, that's a thing. Because as soon as it becomes a material thing in the world, they point at it and go, oh, well, that must be a thing because I can see it.
That's great. Really great example. Anne, you want to add one?
I think, yeah, working with your cheerleaders as well, like working with the people who are, you know, like this group of people, for example, you know, people that are like-minded, you can start to shift those things. The people who are sort of don't care and will just let you rewild or whatever, you know, that they won't sort of disrupt you. And then, you know, sometimes you just need to ignore the negative noise for a while you create this future that, and then can show that it's preferred.
Yeah. So I'm going to add to that as well, and I think both of you, I think to me, it's an extremely important question. When we're thinking about the backcasting, some of you will probably be wanting to think about how can we make some changes occur? And where do we need to make the changes? Is it the Cigar and Whiskey Club, or is it the Yas Club? You know, some of the local things, and maybe some of or the Bike Club or something. But to me, the answer there lies in to make the change you can. Like what Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see, make the change you can. And this is, for me, why we're doing 2040 is to try to work with those who are on the way of making change happen, which is you. I fought 35 years trying to convince clients. And, we did many, many times. And it's exhausting. And this is part of it. It's exhausting. And many of you are doing this every day. It's exhausting. And so finding places where you can regenerate is crucial. And I think also we do know that there's incremental change that we can impact. And this is what we're thinking about incrementally forward. This is what we're all about. But with the backcast, it's incrementally backwards, thinking about this increment and then this increment and this increment. This is what for us, so what does the mountain want to see? What does the corona want to see? Over these increments out towards that vision of being this hub, which is founded with the roots, but it's also looking to the future. And that's our challenge with that. And it's a really great question and a very difficult one. We have time for one more question. Sorry, we could keep
you
going.
actually
Sorry, Christian.
partly answered my question with your wonderful example, but I'll ask it because I had the mic anyway. And I was actually interested in wondering if there are tools or frameworks that enable you to move forward without necessarily having a big vision, but actually operating from a place of principles and values and then seeing where it emerges. And actually your example was a perfect example, which was actually you didn't really know where it would end up. But I wonder, are there tools or frameworks that you ever use that enable that type of work based on principles and values?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number. I'm thinking of something like a futures triangle, where like you're sort of analysing more around the present. There's a pull of the past, but you're sort of more thinking about the systems and the tools that you might have available to you now that can help you move forward into the future. And also with all of these tools, it looks like that needs to be 2050, but it doesn't. The scale of that futures coin is up to what you need it to look like. If it needs to be, we're going to do something in 2 years' time. If there's enough to get yourself out of the day-to-day, this is what I need to do tomorrow, and be broad enough that you're thinking about that strategy and a step forward, then it doesn't necessarily need to be a time frame that's
I guess
forever.
it's more than the strategy, it's actually how you show up in the world. Does something emerge from that?
So I'm going to leave this in the library. I've got two things for the library anyway. So this is a regenerative design field kit that we made. This is the third edition. We made it 2 years ago. But it's the obliquoscope that we were wandering around with in the Genius Loci, and then 40 questions. So from 4 different perspectives of change makers. But just questions like, who or what should we involve in order to redesign this? How might we invite people to convene with common purpose? What prevents meaningful change from happening for you? And what stories will people be telling about our actions in 100 years? Just having little prompt questions that sort of allow people to bring them together and go, oh, maybe we can change this. Maybe we can call it Be That Future. It's this all. And when you were talking before lunch about the sort of like pockets of the future, it's almost like, don't see a pocket of the future, be a pocket of the future. And all of the ideas that we've seen in the tent so far, you go, you can totally see pockets of the future coming from this, like things, to Chrissy's point, that we can do. Things we can do, be a pocket of the future.
And with that, Anne and John, thank you so very much for sharing your cones, your wisdom, your passion. Give them a hand.